Hello and welcome to the June Table Topics at the Mississippi Library Commission. I'm Tracy Carr, the Library Services Director here. This month's talk is co-hosted by the Madison County Library System, and all of our table topics are sponsored by the Mississippi Humanities Council. This week, Ellen Hunter Ruffin, will present Margret and H.A., a partnership that created an icon. So as Ellen is telling us all about the Rays and their creations and their lives, if you have a brilliant thought or question or comment, please go ahead and put it in the chat so you don't forget. And if you're on Facebook, put it in the comments. And at the end, we'll loop back and get all of your comments and questions answered and addressed. So a little bio of Ellen here, and then I'll hand it over to her. Ellen Hunter Ruffin is the Associate Professor at the University of Southern Mississippi, has been Curator of the A de Grummond Children's Literature Collection since 2006. She has served on the Newbery Medal Committee, the Children's Literature Legacy Award Committee, and the Schneider Family Book Award Committee, among others. And serving as the Curator of the A de Grummond Collection has given her an insider's understanding of the work of Margaret and H.A., the creators of Curious George. So we're so happy to have you here, Ellen, and I can't wait to hear all you have to tell us. So please take it away.
Thank you, Tracy. This is going to be a little mix of brief talk and a lot of looking at stuff. But I wanted to begin with a quote that the Jewish Museum of New York used in 2010 when they presented the Margaret and H.A. exhibit. Here's their statement. America's favorite monkey, the irrepressible Curious George, is always in trouble. In a great turn of fate, he helped his creators get out of life-threatening danger. Nearly 80 original drawings from Margaret and H.A.'s children's books and documentation related to their escape from Nazi-occupied Europe are on view. They continued, Curious George, the beloved, irrepressible monkey of children's folklore, booklore is famous for his ability to save the day, interpreting the role he played in safeguarding his own creators in times of danger as symbolic. This exhibition delves into the remarkable lives and works of Margaret and H.A. I wanted to begin with that because I think that it speaks volumes when you consider that a major museum like the Jewish Museum of New York launched an exhibit on Margaret and H.A., who did indeed flee on bicycle on their way out of Paris into a neutral area to escape the Holocaust. And it also came to Mississippi. The final spot to see the exhibit was at the Mississippi Museum of Art, and it was fabulous. We had a wonderful time. So I just wanted to recall some of those memories. So Margaret and H.A. fled Paris in 1940 with a Curious George manuscript in their suitcase. And during a tense inspection of their belongings by a border official, children's illustrations were found and they were allowed to continue on their way, eventually reaching the United States. They were initially considered potential spies because when they spoke French, they had a German accent. So George really did save them. It's possible when featuring original drawings and preparatory dummies for Margaret and H.A. children's books and documentation related to their escape from Nazi-occupied Europe to examine the parallels between the obstacles the Rays faced and the drawings that may have saved their lives. The story is of their life in Paris and their narrow escape. I want to talk just a minute about the origins of Curious George. This is the first Curious George. Now, I'm Margaret Ray. You're going to get to hear her toward the end of this presentation. This is the first Curious George we did in 1939, so it's titled Curious George, in the tower of an old castle in the south of France. So they were actually at a tower in the south of France. They weren't in Paris at this time because they had left Paris, which was their home at the time, to get away from the tense noise and activity and things that were quite frightening. And they went to Chateau Fuega, and H.A. Ray completed the illustrations after they returned to Paris in 1940. The story, which begins with Fifi, not George, in the wild and his first encounter with the man with the yellow hat, does have biographical undertones. While working in Brazil in the late 1920s and early 1930s, selling goods along the Amazon River, H.A. Ray had ample opportunities to observe and sketch monkeys in their habitat. He would later complain of the tropical heat, which may explain the wide-brimmed head cover worn by the man with the yellow hat. Some consider him the parental figure in the story, and of course he is, and perhaps a self-portrait of H.A. Ray himself, which it is not. The Rays, who kept two pet monkeys in their Rio de Janeiro apartment, took them along when they sailed to London in 1936. Fifi's safe arrival at a port in the story after his sea journey from the jungle to the city suggests a happier resolution to the cold sea voyage of the Ray's marmosets, which did not survive. So I want to begin to share the screen and let you see some of these treasures that we're talking about. Here it is. Do you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay. Of course, this is from the de Grummond Children's Literature Collection at the University of Southern Mississippi. And this is titled Margaret and H.A. Ray, a partnership that created an icon.
Ellen, yes, I was just going to get you to do that so we can't look ahead.
Is that good?
If you click on display settings.
Thank you. Swap presenter view.
Yes.
Thank you. Good?
Yes.
Is that good?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. All right, so we've already heard about the man with the yellow hat, and I wanted you guys to be able to see this. This is actually an original illustration from Curious George, and they wrote on the bottom of it, to Lena de Grummond, and you can barely see it. It's in pencil, but this is after they had corresponded via letter. There's a picture of Margaret and H.A. And here they are on their porch in Brazil. They left Paris on bicycle and then got to Portugal, which was a neutral country at the time, and then landed at their home in Brazil and you can see Margaret looks very tense. They're waiting information from her sister to see if they can get to the United States. Let me give you just a little background on H.A. Ray himself. This little drawing is something he did at age 8. I think it's fairly remarkable. And I love it because I love seeing just what the world was like when H.A. Ray was 8 years old. And this was in Hamburg, Germany, where he was born and grew up. He also, in high school, worked with the school newspaper and did some political cartoons. He was very clever, as you can see. And here are some other things. If you read German, you can figure some of these out. I don't read German, and I'm not here to translate it, but I think that you can have a sense of this is a very young man who is totally capable of doing something quite complex. H.A. was in World War I. Here's a picture of him as a young man. And this is where he really became interested in astronomy. He would gaze at the stars at night. He wasn't much on war or fighting, but he loved to look at the stars. As a matter of fact, we just interviewed some of the Ray family members day before yesterday, and one of them had the little, and I mean it's small, a small astronomy book that even had maps that unfolded that H.A. must have had in World War I when he was studying the stars. We also have things like their passports. This is Margaret's passport. I want to make a comment about, well, when we get to it, Margaret was she was an artist, and she went to the Bauhaus, a very avant-garde art school in Germany, which has since closed, and she studied photography. So these are images, actual photos that Margaret herself did. She left. So let me back up. Margaret and H.A. were both from Hamburg, Germany. And Margaret was younger than H.A. The first time he remembered seeing her was at a party that her sister threw. And Margaret came sliding down the banister and landed right in front of H.A. Ray. Of course, he just considered her Mary's little sister. And Margaret, however, remembered H.A., knew he was an artist, knew that he had left Germany to get a job in Brazil for his brother-in-law. And he was involved in an import-export business that really gave him an opportunity to travel all over Brazil and acquaint himself with not only Brazil and the geography of Brazil, but also it gave him an opportunity to look at the wildlife and practice drawing it, which figures prominently in Curious George. But anyway, Margaret, by the time she had gone to Brazil, had been at the Bauhaus and had decided she wanted to open an advertising agency. So she convinced H.A. Ray he needed to leave his steady, well-paying job and open an advertising agency. And this has sort of a double purpose. It's their wedding announcement and their advertising agency. So it's kind of fun to see. And of course, Margaret's the camera and H.A. is the palette and the sketch pad. Oh, and I want to point out, Margaret's name is Margareta, or however she said it, but they both changed their names while in Brazil to make them user-friendly. She became Margaret, M-A-R-G-R-E-T, and he became Hans Ray. The Erzbach went away. And I'm just showing you different things that they did. He did some Brazilian fairy tales. I think this is beautiful, the colors in it. You don't really have an idea that Curious George is going to evolve from this. And this, can you see, is a after shaving lotion. I think it burned a little bit, perhaps, and sort of humorous. Here is another one. This is about almost like Pepto-Bismol, something to keep you from being sick. And this one right here is another one about therapeutics. It's a salve that they're suggesting would cure anything. And there's one thing I'll point out later. He used tape on those things, and we still have that tape, which is an archivist's nightmare because it turns yellow, as you saw. So here we go. Here's the title page to Curious George. H.A. Ray, Fifi, The Adventures of a Monkey. And here we go. Here's the first page. This is a story about Fifi, who lived in the jungle somewhere in Africa. He was very happy, and he was a good little monkey. He only had one fault. He was very curious and always tried to imitate everything. So this book, and this continues with George's trip on a big ship, leaving Africa, coming to with the man in the yellow hat to the United States. And but Fifi, as I said earlier, had a safe journey. He made it safely. I also wanted to show you some of these. I'm jumping around a little bit, so forgive me. But this is H.A. looking out. So Margaret and H.A. left Brazil and went to France to be able to have a honeymoon. They were going to be there for 4 weeks, and it turned into 4 years. And they lived at the Terrace Hotel, and this is on their balcony overlooking Paris. And H.A. Ray is looking at that. While he was doing Curious George, he was also working on what was his favorite book. We think he liked it even more than George. It's White, Black, the Penguin. This has an amazing story to it because it did not get published during either H.A. or Margaret's lifetime. I'll tell you about that in a minute. But this is Margaret's brother, who was in Paris. He was obviously a part of the military at the time. This is pre-World War II or pre-Nazi occupation. And they're having a grand time on the balcony, taking pictures. And I think if you look closely, there's snow, which was uncommon. I mentioned how they went to the south of France and were actually suspected spies because of their accents. And they were staying in this castle at Fuega, Castle Fuega, and the authorities did go there and try to, they examined all of the contents of their suitcases and noticed that this man really was a children's author and illustrator. They were doing what they said. H.A. loved, while they were in Paris, to go to the zoo and sketch penguins and any of the exotic animals. I'm assuming Margaret took this picture. But while they were there, it was during the World's Fair in Paris, and the Brazil Pavilion was looking for someone to draw maps of Brazil. And this is why they wound up staying 4 years instead of 4 weeks, because H.A., of course, knew the geography and topography of Brazil, and so he was hired. And for 4 years, he was drawing these maps at the Exposition Internationale in Paris. We have all of these things that I'm showing you are here in the collection. Now this is Cecily G. I don't know if any of you have heard of Cecily G and the 9 Monkeys, but this is actually where George first appeared. And Cecily G figures prominently in George's life, but George manages to steal the stage from the other monkeys. And from there on out, George is the star. Cecily G was a lonely giraffe who didn't have anyone to play with, and these 9 monkeys appeared, and they didn't have a place to sleep. So what did she do? She put them in a giraffe bed. And here is a little dummy of H.A. Ray's drawing of the bed. You can see that he was trying to figure out where the text would go. He was placing it right then. Here are some practice sketches of Curious George. More, this was the last Curious George he did, which is Curious George Goes to the Hospital. And you see the nurse, he's just practicing. And of course, this is an actual illustration from the book Curious George, as is this. One thing Margaret always sort of talked about was how children would be disappointed when they met the Rays because they weren't monkeys, and children were hoping they would be monkeys, and they couldn't cover up their disappointment at the sight of human beings, and so it was kind of just funny. But whether falsely alarming the fire department while experimenting with a telephone, going up in the air with a bunch of balloons or a kite, or falling into the water after a failed attempt to fish with a mop, the little monkey is always in trouble, both propelled and undone by his insatiable curiosity and appetite for adventure. As Margaret once said, the soaking in the bathtub, a news item in the papers, a piece of conversation at a party were all inspiration for Curious George's new escapade. We would write and rewrite. We would draw and redraw. We'd fight over the plot, the beginning, the ending, the illustrations. As a matter of fact, our work is nearly the only thing we did fight about. And while the idea of the monkey's narrow escape from danger was introduced in the first Curious George story created by the Rays in France, the concept of saving the day is only used in their later books written in the safety of America. By the time the man with the yellow hat comes to his rescue in each story, George's capers have already been mitigated with some poetic justice, which may be understood as emblematic of the important role the character had played both in saving the Rays' lives when fleeing Nazi Europe and later helping them rebuild their careers in the country. Now, this book particularly interests me because of the fact that they were always traveling. They were always on the run. And so this book also was published in 1940 in America. And the title of it is How Do You Get There? So by early February, during the first winter of World War II, the Rays were trying to figure out a way to reach the safety of America. They embarked on a new project that may have seemed like the perfect antidote, a flip the flap book. I have it here to show you, but I do have it on the slides as well. How do travelers get to the pyramids? And here you see, how do people go on a boat? There's the ship. Do you understand what I'm showing you? And notice this is a dummy, and there again are the tape stains that drive us crazy. But this book is really an amazing, and it was kind of before its time doing that open the flap book. It was something that H.A. experimented with. And interestingly, you see a Charlie Chaplin character right here, wondering how to get there from here and what to use in getting there. This book was never published, but it's very interesting, and I can't help but point out that H.A. Ray has a bicycle, a tandem bike, that he and Margaret did not ride out on a tandem bike because they could not get along with that idea. So H.A. procured bits and pieces of bikes and put two together, and they rode out at the same time, but not in tandem, into the French countryside. I mentioned White Black the Penguin. I'd like to tell you one thing about this particular book, because it didn't see the light of day until the year 2000. And that was when Anita Silvey, the publisher from Houghton Mifflin in Boston, Constance, uh, came to Hattiesburg for the first Curious George exhibit. And the curator at the time was D. Jones, who showed Anita Silvey these illustrations. And Anita took them back to Boston, and the book was actually published in 2000. So if you want to know the purpose of an archive, that's a good one. All during the time that the Rays were traveling in France, trying to get papers to be able to leave the country, trying to make their way through the craziness of the time. H.A. was keeping track of every dime they spent. And we have all of his journals. They're fascinating to read. You do see, I can't read his handwriting sometimes, but right at the time in 1940, they had $800 in the bank, which I guess was pretty good. Here's some more from an original Curious George at the circus. And I want to, I know I'm jumping around, but there were just so many things I wanted to make you aware of. This is a letter to Ursula Nordstrom, the great children's publisher at Harper and Row, who was going to publish, who did publish several books for H.A., Margaret Wise Brown, and Margaret herself. And this particular letter, he tells her that he wants to change the servant, who is a black servant in the book Elizabeth, to a white servant. And this was written in 1942, and in the 62 edition, you'll see at the bottom right, the maid is, it's probably still politically incorrect, but it gives not really the opprobrium of racism. But I also want to show you the Christmas Manger books he did. These were assimilated Jews. They were culturally Jewish, and they were trying to make money. So notice here it's by Uncle Gus, A Christmas Manger, and it's Matthew and Luke, and it's punch out figures, which even today are appreciated. People think that they're unusual. I have to confess, this is one of my favorite things in the collection, in the Ray papers, because I've never seen a dog on a leash at the Manger. And I love that he has that dog on a leash, and that one of the shepherds doesn't have sheep, but has that dog, a black dog, just like the one that the Rays had. This one cracks me up, and I don't know why he has, I saw 3 ships come sailing in, but he's got Santa Claus, Mary, and you see the baby, Jesus, right there, and Joseph. I don't know if that was something he did with a smile on his face, or he thought it all went together. I have no idea. And then another thing that he used a good bit was his signpost thing. You see that Bethlehem sign. That will appear again. I'll show you. This is a book that Margaret did for Harper and Row, Pretzel and the Puppies, and H.A., of course, illustrated it. And these are little things that he created. He wanted to sell. He wanted to sell them so badly. And he tried to push them. He kept trying to get them to be mass produced. And we have a royalty statement from those that's $3.80. They just didn't make it, but they're a lot of fun. I also wanted to show you some of his creative process and his thinking. Um, this crocodile, while in exile on a lonesome isle, became an ardent bibliophile. When the Rays got to America, they sent out New Year's cards rather than Christmas cards. So here is one of the early cards H.A. drew of himself there in America, and it has their address on it, 42 Washington Square, 1942. This one's 1945. There they are. Do you see them in the window waving to everyone from their apartment in Washington Square? I think what this does is give you an idea of the creative genius of H.A. Rey. He was always creating and always having fun. I love this particular card, 1971. Um, it it shows H.A. Rey's, I think, humor and fun again. I mentioned that H.A. was a lover of the stars. He would give tours to children. He would have stargazing events for children at their summer home in New Hampshire. And he knew everything. The star books that he published have never gone out of print, just like Curious George. And the people I know who get those star books never let them go. They're so great. Here's a planetarium he created that we have here in the collection. You can see that that's one of Margaret's hat boxes, and it actually works, and it was a prototype used for catalog sales, even as late as the 90s. This planetarium was being sold in catalogs. Now, do you remember the signpost? There it is with Hattiesburg. This is the letter H.A. wrote to Dr. Lena de Grummond when she wrote to him in 1966 asking for bits and pieces of his work for the de Grummond Collection, which it wasn't then. And he wrote back and has George facing toward Hattiesburg. Margaret became interested in pottery, and we have her complete collection of pottery. This is an image of Margaret that she did of herself. This is one of H.A. I can't begin to explain them, but they're fun to see. This I can explain. This is a letter H.A. would write Margaret every day when she went to a ceramics colony, a pottery colony in Maine in the summer. And so this one is in 1971, and you'll see that he says, "Did you ever spill a whole can of Gaines meal on the floor?" And well, no, I did. Scoopy was delighted. I wasn't. I didn't want him to gobble it all. So with the lightning speed so characteristic of me, I figured out the problem, put some over by Scoopy. You can see Scoopy's happily eating his share, and H.A. in a very complimentary fashion is bending over, sweeping it up. And then he complains about the slowness of the U.S. mail. This was 1971, and it's snail mail, which I think is a very interesting modern day reference that he had no intention of. Here again, I mentioned the fact that this was a partnership that created an icon. Margaret mentioned standing behind Hans all of her life and making it, giving him expressions and things that he needed to be able to capture emotions and images of George. So Margaret was actually the prototype of George. And I mentioned too that H.A. and Margaret always had a black dog, and here's one of their black dogs right before Hans died in 1977. And Margaret received this from children. She received many cards and letters from children, but what a sad day. I'll bet even Curious George cried. And again, Hattiesburg. I want to stop and recommend a book, if you haven't read it, by Louise Borden, The Journey That Saved Curious George, that will really give you a timeline history of the Ray's escape. Louise is an amazing, she has a European history background. She is a delightful speaker and a great friend to the collection. Um, she never knew Margaret and Hans. I never knew Margaret and Hans, but I feel as if I did because I've spent much time with them. I wanted you guys to be able to hear Margaret, so I'm hoping this works. I've got the transcript right at the bottom there. You can read it while I play it. It's coming. It's not working. What do I do, Tracy?
We just are all just going to be sad that we don't get to hear it, but we can read it.
I
And
want you guys to hear it because she says the only thing, you say a lot about George. I wanted you to hear her say George and me, but the only thing which wasn't mentioned enough was Hans Ray, my husband, who was a genius and who was a genius, she repeated herself, and who did all of the illustrations in the book and was the better part of the family anyhow. So I propose let's have a toast to Hans Ray. Cheerio, here's to Hans. So that's all of my slides. That's not the whole story. There's no way I can fit the whole story of Margaret and H.A. Ray in the time slot that we have. But I wanted to kind of give you all an overview of the stuff. So I can stop sharing, right?
yes. Well, that we love looking at stuff, and I'm guessing that is what drew you to uh, the archives, is getting to look at the stuff. Um, so let's see. We had
Yes.
some comment there. There were a lot of comments, and I think one actual question so far. Someone said, someone that was me, said that that giraffe bed with all the monkeys
Yes.
in it was just unbelievably cute. It just too cute for me.
So
Um,
clever. So clever.
Santa being in there, I feel is deliberate. I feel that it is. I don't think he was confused. I think it was also like when you said like, "Hey, they're trying to make some money." What better symbol of commerce in America than putting Santa in a boat?
Yeah,
Um,
well, and he was trying to make money. Let's not forget that.
exactly.
So,
That's what I mean. Like, okay, well, here's Santa, the symbol of. So then Constance was really excited about the New Year's Eve card with their apartment in Washington Square, because her parents lived in Washington Square as newlyweds in
ah,
1959, around the corner from there in an NYU dorm, which is very
oh,
cute.
wow. You know, I think I got so nervous I didn't mention this, but the Rays eventually moved to Boston. and ended up in Cambridge. It would have been later than 59, so they might have been at Washington Square, Constance, when your parents were there. But they did move to Boston, and that's where they both died. And there's just a real connection with Curious George in Boston because, of course, Houghton Mifflin is there, and they published Curious George. I didn't mention one thing that I think is rather significant, and that is they had an editor in England, Grace Hogarth, who was going to publish Fifi. They couldn't call, and she was an immigrant as well. She had to escape to America. And so she wound up with Houghton Mifflin in Boston. And when the Rays got to the United States, she went down and offered them an opportunity to have a contract immediately for Curious George. And How Do You Get There From Here? There were 3 different books, and which they were very fortunate because that helped them get over the hump and not struggle. But Grace Hogarth, as I say, was British and said there's no way this will sell in England with the name Curious George because King George was on the throne. So the name of George in England was Zozo for many, many years. And that's just something fun to know about. And I don't, I'm looking at these questions.
Let me read them. That way,
Okay.
That way we have a record of what they all are for the people watching later.
Thank
Not
you.
That, so we want to include them as well. Joe asked, what items in the de Grummond's Ray collection have most surprised you?
Well, I'll be honest. The correspondence is very revealing. It appears that, it's just a very interesting thing to read the correspondence because we thought Curious George, because H.A. received a contract from Gallimard in Paris and got an advance, and the book was never published because everybody had to leave. They had to escape. And I did notice in the correspondence that H.A. offered the money back to Gallimard after the war. And it's very moving to see because there's just this happiness that the publisher is still alive and H.A. is still alive. And the publisher even says, Mr. Ray, when I saw your name, I was filled with joy. And so it's a very revealing thing, but we thought the book had been published in France, and through various scholars and researchers we learned through careful reading that it was not published first in France. That's kind of the most surprising thing.
We're going to get back to these, but is there a book people can read about the de Grummond Collection? If they want to learn more about.
What a well-placed question, Tracy. There is. As a matter of fact, it came out in April, and it's sort of it gives you a description of everything about the de Grummond Collection, published by University Press of Mississippi. And I wanted to say that the Ray chapter is especially good. Anne Ashmore wrote the chapter and gives tidbits of things that I don't talk about today. You saw this image, but you see we have beautiful plates in the book, and here are some star drawings by H.A. All very fascinating. And this book gives you an overview of the collection and the unique aspects of the collection. We asked scholars of children's literature from all over the country to contribute, and these people had done research here at the collection. So it's authentic. It's an authentic rendering of research.
Charlie had a question, and I think you actually mentioned where the name change came from, but did Hans always go by H.A. or was that done later for marketability?
You know, Charlie, I think that it was done for marketability, because just seeing the family members the other day, they all referred to him as Uncle Hans. So I think the family was, and I could be wrong. I refer to him as H.A. because I am, you know, a librarian who happens to read his stuff. But he he did go by Hans. And I do have a letter from one of his nephews. Oh, I didn't include it in this presentation, but it's very funny because he said he wouldn't be able to join us on the Zoom call. We had 8 of the family members on a Zoom call on Wednesday morning. And Louise Borden joined us, and these were people who are great nieces and nephews of Hans. And his sister was their grandmother. Did y'all make that connection? And so one of the nephews said, my mother told me that my grandmother was very well educated, very bossy, and very difficult, in essence, is what he said. And he said, and Margaret was the same way. So it's kind of interesting to see that Hans might have married someone not too far from the description of his mother.
That's good. Charlie also had a comment with that when you had the picture up of Margaret over his shoulder and kind of
Yes.
running the show. He said that this is another case of behind every great man is a great woman.
It's true. And Hans would say that. As a matter of fact, he was one of the first to put her name on the books. Now, I asked the executor of the Ray estate, was that because Hans was so sort of a Renaissance man and he was going to add his wife's name to the book? Because at that time, that didn't happen. And she said, oh, no, Ellen. Margaret made sure her name was on those books. So he was very forward thinking. He was a genius, as Margaret herself said. And I love this particular clip that I want y'all to hear. I'm so disappointed, but she really appreciated his genius. He spoke 5 languages, and we have letters in Portuguese, French, German, what other? I can't remember. There's another one, another language, maybe Hebrew. I can't recall. Yes.
Did I may have made this up in my memory when you were talking at the very beginning. Did you say that they had pet monkeys?
They had pet monkeys. They they were going on their honeymoon from Brazil, and they took their monkeys with them, and the monkeys didn't make it. So I probably flew through that, but the monkey that they created did make it from the wild to civilization.
Right. Yeah, you really glossed over that dead monkey thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense, but also, you know, there's not a lot of people who have pet monkeys. So
No,
that is, yeah. So they
they
left,
were marmosets, just so you know.
all right. I don't know the difference, but I'll Google it later.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're in Paris. They leave on bicycle and go to that castle in the south of France.
Well, I'm so sorry. They go to the castle just for the summer to get away from Paris.
Okay.
And this is before they bicycle out.
Okay. So they went.
They were hours ahead of the Nazis
Okay.
in leaving.
Constance also said that Margaret donated some of her papers locally instead of sending them all to Hattiesburg, and she has a link for us to the Boston Public Library's children's collection, something maybe. I guessed from the yes.
I'm sure that because the publisher was in Boston, there was pressure on her after she was widowed to donate some of her papers locally. But the Boston Public Library did name the children's room after them. So I put a link of the visual in the chat.
Yeah, Constance, is that the room, the Curious George room?
Yes.
I went for the opening of that. It wasn't very long ago, right?
No, because the library just finished a big renovation.
Yeah, it was a great experience. So yes, they do have some things. Oh, Joe Hackle is saying if I want to play the clip, I can do it on my iPhone. I can do one on my iPhone. It's different from this one. We discovered this particular one yesterday in the archive, so in the digital archives, and I loved it because she was toasting Hans. But listen to this one. I'll play it if I can find it. Wouldn't that be nice? Hold on. Here it is. Okay. Where do I need to hold it? Right here, huh?
Yeah, into your microphone.
In France, when we did the first Curious George, George was really born in France. As a matter of fact, I tell you a little more precisely, we did a book about a giraffe, and the giraffe took 9 little monkeys in. And one of those little monkeys was George. And then a while later, we thought of a book about a monkey, and
George.
I'm going to say it like that forever.
She really says it. That's the other reason I wanted to use this clip. I'm so disappointed. We rehearsed it and everything yesterday, but you know, the plans of, what is it? Mice and men.
Nice ladies who are trying to do a thing.
Yeah, it didn't work. But I'm
are there
so
any other questions from our audience? Do you have any other comments you want to make, Ellen?
Just that there's so much more to the Rays than Curious George, and yet Curious George tells some of their story as well. So I think that if anybody wants to learn more about them, let me invite you to the open reading room at the McCain Library and Archives, to the de Grummond Children's Literature Collection. And
we did have a question about that. Do you have to make an appointment? Is it just, can you just walk in? How can we, if someone
thank you.
To be a George scholar.
It's good to make an appointment. It is good because we will pull the materials for you ahead of time. However, you can just walk right in.
It sounds like appointments are encouraged to save everyone.
Well, I think so. Just to be able to give people an opportunity to make it through a lot of materials.
Right. Sounds great. Any other questions? I'm looking at Facebook as if the people on Facebook can respond to me verbally. Checking my phone, like all of the places that people might have a question. Well, if not, I know we're all going to caravan to Hattiesburg to see all these things. I too am disappointed though that they were not actual monkeys, that the rays, that is just really precious. That it's not just like one kid, that it was consistent, that they were like, oh, y'all are just some boring grown-ups.
Oh, yes. Well, in the clip that I wanted you all to hear, where she said that about Cheerio, here's to Hans, just right after it, she said, I don't want to talk anymore about Curious George. So she takes the interview in a different direction.
I like that. That's a good segue.
Funny.
That's a good segue for us. We don't want to talk anymore about Curious George.
That's right.
So thank you to everyone who tuned in on Zoom and Facebook and who's watching this later. We like you too. And if you have any, if you want to learn more, Ellen has told you where to find the collection, the de Grummond Collection at McCain Archives at University of Southern Mississippi. Yeah. And again, thanks to Madison County for co-hosting, and thanks to the Humanities Council for sponsoring. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.